All right, hello. I am at Modcup, so we're here in Jersey City, and Shiv's behind the camera, but we are here, and what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about dank coffees, or more deeply processed coffees, and how you can brew them. There are a lot of different approaches. This is how I approach things. As you guys know, I do really like wash coffees. I like pushing coffees hard. There's kind of a very different approach, in my opinion at least, with coffees like this. So this is a fun coffee. This is a coffee from Edwin Norena, Campo Hermosa. Cinnamon co-ferment. Flavor notes on this are cinnamon sugar, vanilla, lemon tonic, and this is a co-ferment blend of coffees, and it's by Modcup. As you guys know, we've had some videos with Modcup before, but we have a lot of really fun, there's so many fun coffees from Modcup. Although we did do a collaboration on a coffee that was not like this, very, very clean compared to this. But if you want to check out like any of those crazy dank processed coffees, this is a roaster very worthwhile looking at. So we have the coffee here, and whew, that's crazy. So the thing with co-fermented coffees and very processed coffees is I think you have to really shift the mentality of how you brew, and that is going to come in the form of how you pour water on coffee. Coffee is really, really stupid and dumb in the sense that the way this tastes is greatly impacted by how you pour water on it. And then the second thing I think that is also very worthwhile mentioning is the type of equipment you use. So in recent times I've been seeing, and maybe we'll do an actual video on this, but in recent times I've been seeing like people taking high clarity equipment, or like an example would be the EasyPresso ZP6 or SSP Crazy Brewers, and they're brewing coffees like this. My opinion is that when you take high clarity gear and you brew very processed coffees, it can be a good and bad. One is that usually what you're tasting is probably the reason why the coffee is processed in a way is that they're actually like covering up certain things, right? And when you have a piece of equipment that can unlock every single nuanced aspect of the coffee, you can potentially taste a lot of pain. So AKA, I'm tasting what the varietal is compared to the processing. I'm tasting that distinctive separation. I'm tasting the processing falling apart. When you get into that higher clarity stuff, it's also very easy to push coffees over. So you end up getting this like problem where people are buying higher end gear, and a lot of the higher end gear is stylistically going to be higher clarity, and that will make these coffees taste worse. First point is how you pour water on coffee. So the two kind of biggest things that impact, I think, how these coffees taste is one, it's going to be temperature, and then two, it's going to be flow rate. So with temperature, generally lower temperatures. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, for demonstration purposes, we're going to use the same temperature here, but I would suggest that the biggest impact to the cup, in my experience at least, has been temperature. So with most of these processed coffees, use a lower temperature. So not 100 Celsius, 212. In this case, we are using 92, 93 Celsius, 198 Fahrenheit, which I think is a really great starting point for a lot of roasters who are roasting light for processed coffees. So this is a lightly roasted processed coffee here, right? Although color is something that you should never really trust, I think, with processed coffees, because when there's a lot of this processing stuff, colors can really change. Like to me, this is a light roasted coffee. Obviously, it's not like, a dark roast here, but sometimes you can find processed coffees have like different oils and colors. We'll brew 2 cups of coffee and we will see. Hello.
We know him.
So we'll have somebody taste, and for demonstration purposes, we are also going to grind one of these on, 98 mil flat EK somewhere in the back there, and then we will also grind this on like a hand grinder or something. So I'm going to do 2 cups of coffee here, and we'll try to brew them side by side on UFO. Shout outs to Jay. And we're going to keep the temperature the same here, and what I'm just going to change are actually 2 variables. One is the flow rate, like aggressiveness in terms of how much I pour, and then the second is the grinder, right? Like this is just to purely showcase that these coffees can taste drastically different obviously they're going to taste drastically different. But I want to show you like what I think a lot of people are doing, right? A lot of people, if you get the higher end gear, you're like, oh, I'm going to run these coffees with the higher end gear. That's not necessarily the like right choice, if that makes sense. So anyway, so we'll grind one coffee on X-Moon grinder, or we could use Commandante, any of these like higher clarity 48 mil, more heptagonal, traditional, higher clarity style burst sets, and then we'll do one on a 98 flat. So we'll just brew 15 grams of each. The reason why I want to show this off is because like I've been seeing a lot of threads of people, getting grinders like ZP6 or higher clarity equipment, and then they buy these processed coffees and they're like, I don't like the grinder. And they're like, I don't, I've seen people be like, the ZP6 is not a good grinder. Well, it's because like you brew these types of coffees, and I think it's a big mismatch. UFOs set up here. Shout out to Jay again. But I ground this coffee and it's like, whoo, that's insane. Cinnamon and lemon. Yeah, one is ground on an EK, which is, I would say, is going to be like higher clarity. And then I'm going to brew this cup with higher agitation. Like if you've seen how I brew wash coffees, if you've seen how I brew some of those coffees, you are pushing those coffees versus this like lower agitation stuff. Now, the other thing too, again, is like I'm using the same temperature because I only have one kettle here. But like a lot of people, I think, run into the trap of brewing a little too hot for these more processed coffees. And the thing with the processed coffees is when you brew it too hot, when you push the coffees harder, you end up tasting that processing can kind of sometimes become bitter. So the thing that I think confuses a lot of people is that there is a bitterness from over extraction, and then there's also bitterness from when you push processing too far, which I guess could also be technically over extraction. But the thing is like, even though the coffees visually might look really light, or they're of a certain roast level because you have a roaster that is roasting in a certain roast degree, you still should like put these coffees in a slightly different framework or methodology of how you brew. And also there are a variety of different methodologies even among brewing more processed coffees. So for example, you could grind, you might find that with these processed coffees, you can grind even finer than before. So you could do like finer with less pours, finer with slower pours. Like there are a million different ways on how to, I guess, like approach these coffees, right? But that's a fun thing with coffee brewing. Okay, so here is this, and let's see how this works. So this is what I would do if I'm brewing like wash coffee, right? So I like to do 3 pours, and then I do like aggressive agitation, right? Imagine I have like a fun little wet WT thing here, but wow, that coffee smells crazy. So this is like already insane. I mean, it smells amazing, right? Like when you brew these more processed coffees like this, your whole room's it's gonna smell great. But this is a coffee where it's like, if I'm brewing washed, I like to do these long blooms, the agitation, like, already look at how dark, oops, push this to the side here. Look how dark that bloom is. We have 60 grams in there, and there's some amount of time here, and you're letting it bloom a lot longer. And then, I do this very aggressive pour, heavy pour, so heavy agitation, right? This is a kettle I think you can pour up to like 15, 20 mils a second. So I just dumped a ton of water on there. So I'm like, 60, 62 in here. So this is 170, and then I'm going to go up to 255. So I'm actually going to brew both of these to the same ratio, and then go up to, 290. But you can see, it's a UFO, so I can only add so much water in here. And I swirl, I tap. I would say this would represent like higher extraction, higher clarity burst set that a lot of people like when they brew, or like you don't know, right? When you spend all this time and money and on the equipment and you get this type of coffee and you do it, you run it through the same recipe, right? I wouldn't do that. Well, we don't know, right? We'll have Trav blind taste. We'll have someone blind taste for fun. Whereas here, this is going to be this other recipe. So we'll let that one drain down. So I am just going to pour up to the same. So I'm actually going to keep everything the same. Although what's going to happen here is instead of brewing for a full minute, this is done now here. This I'm only going to bloom for 30 seconds. I also have the kettle off because I think dropping temperature helps. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slow pour. So you can see here, every kettle's a little different, but I would say I'm pouring at around 2 to 3 mils a second. So instead of you seeing me like go absolutely insane with the kettle agitation and the turbulence and all of that, you can see that on this, it's very gentle. And my brew times actually might be decently similar because I am pouring slower. But what I have found is this plus like an actual blendier setup is the right way, or the better, the stronger way on how to taste some of these coffees. But I'm keeping all of my timings quite similar, where at like 1 minute 30, I'm adding my third pour. It's a variation of like a lot of the recipes that I have, which is all 3 pours. But you can see I'm pouring way gentler. And I'm also going to go up to 255, or a little over 255. And then you see here, I'm not doing anything to kind of slow down the agitation. At the beginning, I wasn't doing anything crazy with like spoon tech, and I end up with, well, this one, the timer is being weird here, but this ended up at around 240-ish. This is probably going to be around the same, maybe a little faster, because I didn't bloom for that extra 30 seconds. So this was bloomed for 60 seconds with 1 WDT. This is bloomed 30 seconds. And I also swirl at the back here, right? If you see I swirled, like if you're on V60 or whatever, you capture all the fines. Here, I didn't really do that. So I didn't really feel the need to like slow anything down here. So this finished about 15 to 20 seconds earlier, 232. So there we go. Let's go ahead and taste these and see what happens. This is how I would approach coffees. It doesn't necessarily mean like this is the correct way and so on and so forth, right? You may actually prefer one presentation over the other. I just think like these deeply processed coffees, especially as somebody who is coming in who really likes clean, wash, expressive coffees, those types of coffees, I actually do find the blendiness and all of that to be stronger. So let's go ahead and give these 2 coffees a taste, and we will see. But first of all, I want to talk about this coffee because if you smell the coffees, if you smell this, this is absolutely insane. So from an aromatics perspective, like even if you brew a coffee, quote unquote, wrong, when you're operating with coffees of this level, with this type of processing, this type of expressiveness, it doesn't really matter as much, but it's just like, there is a level of palatableness that can be lost or unlocked through brewing. And that's the fun thing with all this coffee stuff. Well, I'll give it a taste. I know which one's which, and then we'll do things blind with Trav for fun. So always with coffees, I would say let them cool. But that's the thing is like with some of these coffees, I think this is worthwhile mentioning, is like when you push these coffees too hard, when they cool, if they're a not good processed coffee, or if they're like, way too overdone, that is when you will taste things falling apart. Like this is, if you do this in a cupping table or you brew stuff and you let it cool, that's when you'll get the most like transparent version of the coffee. And that's when you'll be able to taste XYZ problems or things falling apart. And specifically with coffees like this, you will taste this very distinctive separation between processing and the varietal. Or you'll taste the processing becoming too like bitter or push over or weird. Blind tasting time. Well, so he didn't see what I was doing here. We were just messing around making coffee. I'll have you taste these 2.
What's your name?
Yes, who are you? You should introduce yourself.
I mean, he's been on your channel so many times.
Yeah, I think most people who watch these videos, you will know who this is. I'd hope.
I just watched your Robusta video last night.
Yes. So,
okay.
Let's see. I think you can taste. I mean, they're still warm, but taste these and let me know. This is the same coffee, by the way. Mm-hmm. And then this is, left is left, right is right. Okay, we got to make sure, keep track of things.
Do the slurp one more time. I want to get a zoom.
You can just zoom in on the slurp.
Brian, slurp.
They do taste slightly different. One's got slightly less acidity.
Okay. So what do you think is, well,
You changed the brew temperature is what you did?
no, so this is actually like, there actually are different grinders here and different agitation levels. The temperature is actually the exact same.
Okay.
The difference here is, one, it's the equipment, and then also the agitation. But they're brewed at the same ratio, same dose, same temperature.
The more agitation has brought forward more acidity.
Well, maybe. It can also be a different grinder as well.
Of course.
So the basically, like, what I'm just trying to demonstrate is that one of these cups is like, a lot of people, they get higher end coffee equipment and they get coffees like this, which, like, more processed coffees. And
Yep.
what ends up happening is when you brew coffee that like works well for the higher extraction equipment, some of these coffees
Turn bitter.
Yeah, they turn bitter, they turn weird. Whereas, like, it might actually be stronger to use blendier equipment, lower end equipment, as I'd say,
Interesting.
and brew it in a different way. So between these two, here, we can top you off some more. I have opinions on these. I could see somebody liking either of these, actually. But I think the expressions of these is way different. I guess, like, between this one and this one, which one do you have a preference for? The expression is different between these, for sure.
It is. I think I prefer this one.
Okay, so this one is brewed on the lower end stuff, low agitation, hand grinder type-esque thing. This is brewed on EK with high agitation, and this is like how I would brew wash coffees and like push those coffees with aggressive agitation, long blooms. They're the same temperature actually, but this is with much lower agitation with a blendier burr.
This is the one that I felt had more acidity. Mm-hmm. That's the one you agitated more.
Yes, so you do get that acidity up front, but then it's like, with a coffee like this, it's just like, I'm tasting the processing kind of like going a bit everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess let's talk a little bit about like cup differences, right? Like, I know somebody's gonna be like, oh, I should have used the exact same grinder and did a comparison between the two different agitation levels. I didn't feel like that was necessary because, like, I just want to show, like, just pick the right equipment and then you can pick the right recipe, right? And I think a lot of that still starts with like picking the correct piece of equipment, which is like the grinder here. It's like if you do the higher clarity grinder stuff, you end up, I think, sometimes you end up unlocking too much of the coffee.
Especially with processed coffees.
Right. So, like, I guess let's talk a little bit about what do you experience that's different between these two cups?
More acidity in the first cup, for sure.
For me, I mean, I do like that acidity, but it's stuff at the back where I'm tasting, like, I think I pushed the coffee too over. Where, like, with some of those deeper processed coffees, I feel like that processing becomes bitter. And then you get this, like, weird drying, like, weird mouthfeel. Whereas, like, this, yeah, it's not, acidity up front, but, like, you get this nice, it's like that.
It's more rounded.
Right, that nice rounding because of the lower agitation, but then also you're experiencing all that sweetness at the back because a lot of these lower clarity grinders, like, this type of stuff, right, has that nice, like, rounding to it, and it's not, like, searingly clear, and you're not unlocking all of, like, the pain of the coffee, right? And that's, like, the weird thing, right? I mean, this is subjective, but I think this is, like, worthwhile exploring at home. Is like, you take the same coffee, brew it on, you could even do the same exact recipe, but, like, I think these processed coffees work really well with these more, like, rounder, blendier burr sets, because the coffee's already loud enough where it can punch through and give you enough of that acidity. Like, yes, for sure, this EK brew has more acidity, but, like, it's not as pleasant to drink, in my opinion, versus
I agree. I
this.
much preferred the second one,
Yeah. So the second one is, like, there is enough acidity. It's enough of, like, if you're reading the coffee, you're like, cinnamon, sugar, lemon, vanilla, lemon tonic, right? I'm getting all of those notes here because the coffee's already processed enough and loud enough that it's in there. But then there's this nice, like, rounding and sweetness. Whereas, like, when you're operating with the higher clarity equipment, is, you know, you don't have that safeguard of like the burr set saving you, where it's like, oh, there's this characteristic stylistic like rounding or sweetness on it, and it's kind of like, you know, higher pain point, less forgiving. And when you are running like higher clarity, less forgiving equipment with coffees like this, you have to either brew it a super meticulous way, or, you know, you can suffer a lot, which is like here, where I think we're tasting a lot of like, you know, problems, I would say. Which
I
is
wonder whether
interesting.
that's also, because I've often thought that these more process-driven coffees are easier to brew at home. They're more forgiving because
Yes.
they're loud enough coming out of the bag. And I seem to find that the customer base finds them easy to extract, therefore, and likes them. And that
Yeah.
may be because they're using at home grinders like you're saying.
Yeah, like you don't need to be using ultra high-end equipment. It's just that in recent times, like, you know, if enthusiasts like, oh, if you just spent $3,000, $4,000 on a coffee grinder, you're gonna want to use that, obviously, right? Like that makes sense. But the thing is like some of these coffees, they don't work that well, in my opinion, with those types of coffees. At least you have to adjust how you brew, like greatly adjust how you brew, because you know, if it's not a very well processed coffee, you taste like what they're trying to cover up, right? You're tasting like that, like the problems with the coffee when you are operating at that high transparency of equipment, and with those types of brew methods, which generally speaking is, oh, I push the coffee harder, I extract higher, then you push the coffees two over, which is like what the thing in the first cup we're tasting. This is really for people who have like all these different types of equipment, right? Like for you to experiment with, is that like there are ways to make these more processed coffees more palatable. And a lot of that times is just use like lower end equipment, right? Or use more like regular stuff. Don't pour the water on as hard, because like the coffee's already loud enough. Like you don't have to like do too much, right?
Yeah.
Is my point.
You're not having to unlock as much. Yeah, it makes sense.
But
But
yeah,
my question is, the people that have those incredible home brewing setups that cost however much money they cost, my experience is that they don't typically go for these heavily processed coffees anyway.
Yeah.
And they have that.
yeah, a lot of people end up at the wash coffee, into like the
Typically-
connoisseur wash coffee world. But
Yeah.
there are coffee grinders. So like, for example, there's this coffee grinder called the Easy Presso ZP6, which is like everybody's first experience with high clarity burr sets, or like the Time More 7078, these high transparency burr sets, and they put a coffee through there. That's the first time that a lot of people are able to taste like the problems with coffee, or
Yeah.
like processing with like, wow, there is this processing that is like pushed over. And it's because when you have a burr set that can unlock that type of thing, or you're brewing in a way, right, that can push for those things, you end up running, it's not as forgiving. You end up running into all the problems. So it's quite interesting. Like, yeah, that's like a whole separate discussion with what people are brewing coffee at home and all of that. But anyway, yeah, that was just like a, you know, quickish video on just like my thoughts and methodology right now with brewing these more processed coffees. You know, how do you approach it in terms of equipment you use? How do you approach it when you brew as well? So hopefully that was helpful. Thank you, Trav, for cameoing in this.
Thank you for brewing.
Bye.